On February 9th, 2007, a 44-year-old Nebraska farmer named Warren Dill stood in the auction yard at Kearney Implement watching a 1998 Massey Ferguson 8270 roll across the block. The tractor had 4,200 hours on it. The paint was clean, the tires showed minimal wear, the cab glass was intact, but the auctioneer's voice carried a specific tone when he said, "Transmission failure, sold as is, no warranty." The bidding opened at $18,000. Nobody moved. The auctioneer dropped to $15,000. Still nothing. At $12,000, a man near the front raised his card. The auctioneer pointed. "I got 12. Do I hear 13? Silence. 12 going once. Warren raised his hand. 13,000. The first bidder shook his head and dropped out. 13 going once, twice, sold to bidder 247. Warren walked to the cashier's office and wrote a check for $14,040, including buyer's premium. As he was folding the receipt, a man in a dealership jacket approached. The jacket had Kearney Implement, Service Manager, embroidered above the pocket. The man's name tag said Derek Paulson. "You just bought that 8270? Derek asked. "I did," Warren said. Derek shook his head. "You know what's wrong with it?" "Transmission failure," Warren said. "According to you." Derek's expression changed slightly. "According to our diagnostic, we quoted the owner $22,000 to rebuild it. He decided to sell instead." Warren looked at him. "$22,000 for a transmission rebuild on a 9-year-old tractor?" Derek said. "It's a CVT transmission, complex system, expensive parts, dealer-level repair." Warren said, "We'll see." Derek said, "You're not going to be able to fix that yourself. When you figure that out, bring it in. We'll do the work." Warren put the receipt in his pocket and walked out. The Massey Ferguson 8270 was loaded onto Warren's flatbed trailer that afternoon and hauled 37 miles north to his farm outside Elm Creek. Warren backed the trailer into his machine shed, shut down his truck, and stood looking at the tractor for a long time. He'd just spent $14,000 on a machine a dealership had declared unrepairable at any reasonable cost. His wife Carol had asked him that morning why he was going to an auction when they didn't need equipment. Warren had said he was just looking. Now he owned a tractor with a failed transmission and no clear plan for what to do with it. If you're here because you understand what it means to trust your own hands more than someone else's invoice, because you've seen a dealership walk away from a problem they created, or because you know that unrepairable sometimes just means unprofitable for us to fix, then you're watching the right story. This channel exists for people who remember when a service department's word actually meant something. When we can't fix it, didn't automatically mean you need to buy new. Subscribe if that matters to you. These stories don't get told anywhere else. Warren Dill had been farming 1,100 acres of corn and soybeans in Phelps County since 1987. He'd grown up on the same land. His father had farmed it before him. Warren's mechanical education had come from necessity. When equipment broke during harvest season and the dealer couldn't get a technician out for 3 days, you either learned to fix it yourself or you watched your crop sit in the field while the weather window closed. Warren had rebuilt engines, transmissions, hydraulic systems, electrical harnesses. He'd fabricated parts on a lathe in his shop when the factory part was on back order for 6 weeks. He'd kept a 1979 International 1086 running until 2003 by learning to machine his own injector sleeves. He did not send equipment to dealerships unless the repair required specialized tools he didn't own or diagnostic software he couldn't access. The Massey Ferguson 8270, sitting in his shed, fell into a category Warren had seen before. A tractor that was too new to scrap, too expensive to repair through a dealer, and exactly the right age to be profitable if he could fix it himself. On February 12th, Warren began the diagnostic process. He started the engine. It fired normally. He let it idle for 10 minutes. Oil pressure was good. Temperature was normal. No unusual sounds. He engaged the transmission. Nothing happened. He tried every range, forward, reverse, high, low. The transmission did not engage. The tractor sat in neutral regardless of what position he selected. Warren shut down the engine and climbed underneath with a flashlight. The CVT transmission on the 8270 was a Fendt design, complex but not unknowable. He inspected the external hydraulic lines. No leaks. He checked the shift actuator solenoids. They clicked when he manually triggered them with a jumper wire. He pulled the transmission pan. The fluid was dark brown, almost black, and smelled burnt. Warren drained the transmission completely. 6 gallons of fluid came out. He pulled the filter. It was clogged with material that looked like clutch friction material mixed with metal shavings. Warren set the filter aside and inspected the pan. There was metallic debris in the bottom, but not as much as he'd expected for a catastrophic failure. He spent the next 2 days disassembling the transmission. The CVT unit came out in sections. Warren laid each component on his workbench and inspected it. The variator pulleys showed wear but were not damaged. The drive chain had stretch but was intact. The clutch packs were worn but not destroyed. Warren kept looking for the failure point, the catastrophic damage that would justify a $22,000 rebuild quote. He didn't find it. What he found instead was contamination. The entire transmission had been run with fluid that was breaking down, fluid that was the wrong specification or had been contaminated with something that degraded its lubrication properties. The damage was wear-related, not failure-related. The transmission hadn't exploded. It had been slowly destroyed by bad fluid. Warren pulled the transmission input speed sensor and found it caked with debris. He tested it with a multimeter. No signal. A failed sensor would tell the transmission computer that the input shaft wasn't turning, and the computer would refuse to engage any gear as a protective measure. The sensor cost $38 from a parts supplier in Omaha. On February 19th, Warren ordered new transmission fluid, a complete filter kit, the input speed sensor, and a set of clutch friction plates. Total parts cost $840. He spent the next 4 days cleaning every component, replacing the worn parts, reassembling the transmission, and reinstalling it in the tractor. On February 23rd, Warren refilled the transmission with the correct fluid specification, installed the new sensor, and started the engine. He let it warm up, then engaged the transmission. The tractor moved forward. Warren shifted through every range, forward, reverse, high, low, every gear engaged smoothly. He drove the tractor out of the shed and across his yard. The transmission responded perfectly. Warren shut down the tractor and sat in the cab for a long time. He'd just repaired a failed transmission for $840 in parts. Kearney Implement had quoted the previous owner $22,000. That was a $21,160 difference. Warren climbed down and walked back into his shop. He needed to clean up, but something was bothering him. The contaminated fluid, the wrong specification, the failed sensor. Warren walked back to the tractor and began a more thorough inspection of the cab interior. He checked the glove box. Empty. He checked the storage compartments. Empty. He pulled up the cab floor mat. Underneath, wedged between the floor panel and the firewall, was a folded manila envelope. Warren pulled it out. Inside were service records from Kearney Implement dated between June 2005 and December 2006. 6 service appointments. 3 of them were transmission fluid services. Warren read through each record carefully. June 14, 2005, transmission fluid service, Technician M. Hendricks, fluid used, universal tractor hydraulic fluid. October 3, 2005, transmission fluid service, Technician M. Hendricks, fluid used, universal tractor hydraulic fluid. March 22, 2006, transmission fluid service, fluid used, universal tractor hydraulic fluid. Warren pulled the operator's manual for the Massey Ferguson 8270 from the shelf in his shop, where he'd put it after finding it in the tractor's cab. He flipped to the transmission section. The fluid specification was listed clearly. Fendt transmission fluid or approved equivalent. Do not use universal hydraulic fluid. Warren sat at his workbench holding the service records and understood what had happened. Kearney Implement had serviced the transmission 3 times in 18 months. Every time, their technician had used the wrong fluid. The wrong fluid had contaminated the system, degraded the clutch packs, clogged the filter, and eventually killed the input speed sensor. The transmission had failed because the dealership had serviced it incorrectly. And then the dealership had quoted the owner $22,000 to fix the damage they had caused. Warren put the service records back in the envelope and put the envelope in his filing cabinet. He did not call Kearney Implement. He did not call the previous owner. He did not post about it online. He just put the records away and went back to work. Planting season in 2007 started late. Warren used the Massey Ferguson 8270 to pull a 16-row planter through 600 acres of corn ground. The tractor handled it without hesitation. The CVT transmission was smooth, responsive, and exactly what Warren had needed for variable rate planting. He finished planting on May 18th, on schedule and under budget. At the co-op in Elm Creek, Warren was fueling the 8270 when a farmer named Ed Colby pulled up. Ed farmed 1,800 acres and ran newer equipment, mostly John Deere. Ed looked at the Massey Ferguson and walked over. "That's a nice-looking tractor," Ed said. "It does the job," Warren said. "What year is it?" 1998. Ed looked surprised. "You buy it new?" "Bought it at auction 3 months ago." "From where?" "Kearney Implement Dispersal Sale." Ed's expression changed. "The one with the bad transmission?" Warren nodded. "They quoted the guy $22,000 to fix it. He sold it instead." Ed said, "And you fixed it?" "I did." "For how much?" Warren said, $840 in parts. Ed stared at him. "You're telling me you fixed a transmission Kearney said was unrepairable for $840? "I'm telling you it wasn't unrepairable," Warren said. "It was contaminated with wrong fluid. I cleaned it, replaced some wear parts, and put the right fluid in." Ed said, "Whose fault was the wrong fluid?" Warren looked at him. "You'd have to ask Kearney." Ed drove away. Warren finished fueling and went back to the field. He didn't think much about the conversation until 2 weeks later when Ed called him at home. "Warren, I need to ask you something," Ed said. "Go ahead." "You said Kearney used the wrong fluid in that 8270's transmission. That's what the service records show." Ed was quiet for a moment. "I've been taking my equipment to Kearney for 12 years. They've done transmission services on 3 of my tractors. You think they used the wrong fluid on mine too?" Warren said, "I don't know what they used on yours, Ed." Ed said, "But if they used it on that Massey Ferguson 3 times, they might be using it on everything." Warren said, "That's possible." Ed said, "I'm going to check." Ed Colby pulled the service records for his 3 John Deere tractors and called Kearney Implement. He asked the service manager what fluid they'd used for his transmission services. The service manager said he'd have to check and would call back. 3 days later, the service manager called and said they'd used manufacturer-approved fluid on all of Ed's equipment. Ed asked for documentation. The service manager said he'd send it. A week passed. No documentation arrived. Ed called back. The service manager said he was still working on it. Ed drove to Kearney Implement in person on June 8th and asked to speak with Derek Paulson, the service manager who had been at the auction. Derek came out to the customer area. Ed asked directly, "What transmission fluid do you use for service work?" Derek said, "We use manufacturer-specified fluids for every application." Ed said, "Specifically, what fluid did you use on Warren Dill's Massey Ferguson 8270 between 2005 and 2006? Derek's expression hardened. "I don't have access to records from machines we don't own anymore." Ed said, "Warren has the records. They show your technician used universal hydraulic fluid 3 times. The operator's manual says not to use universal fluid in that transmission." Derek said, "I'm not going to discuss another customer's service history." Ed said, "Then I want my service records. All of them, for every machine I've brought here in 12 years. Derek provided the records. Ed took them home and went through them line by line. 3 transmission services on 3 different tractors between 2004 and 2007. Every service record listed the same thing: universal tractor hydraulic fluid. Ed called 2 other farmers he knew who used Kearney Implement for service. Both of them pulled their records. Both of them found the same fluid listed on transmission service work. On June 15, 2007, all 3 farmers drove to Kearney Implement together and asked to speak with the owner, a man named Gregory Stahl, who had owned the dealership since 1989. They sat in Gregory's office and laid out the service records. Ed Colby did the talking. "Your service department has been using the wrong transmission fluid on customer equipment for at least 3 years. We have documentation. We want to know what you're going to do about it." Gregory looked at the records. He looked at Derek Paulson, who was standing in the doorway. Derek said, "We use what's cost-effective. Universal fluid works fine in most applications." Ed said, "The manufacturer says it doesn't, and Warren Dill's Massey Ferguson failed because of it." Gregory said, "That tractor was sold as is. We're not liable for it anymore." Ed said, "But you are liable for ours, and if you damaged our transmissions with wrong fluid, you're going to repair them for free, or we're filing a complaint with Massey Ferguson Corporate and John Deere Corporate and every other manufacturer you represent." Gregory Stahl asked them to give him 2 weeks to review the situation. The 3 farmers left. 2 weeks later, Gregory called Ed and offered to reservice all 3 tractors with correct fluid at no charge. He did not admit fault. He did not offer compensation for potential damage. He just offered free fluid changes. Ed said no. He said, "We're done with Kearney Implement. We'll go somewhere else." Gregory said, "That's your choice." Ed hung up. The story spread the way stories spread in rural communities. One farmer told another. That farmer told someone else. Within 6 weeks, 12 farmers in Phelps County had pulled their service records from Kearney Implement and found universal fluid listed on transmission services where manufacturer-specific fluid should have been used. Not all of them left immediately. Some of them confronted the dealership and accepted the offer of free reservice. But others, the ones who had experienced unexplained transmission problems in recent years, started asking harder questions. One farmer, a man named Carl Bricker, had paid $18,000 for a transmission rebuild on a 2003 Case IH MX240 in 2006. The failure had occurred 8 months after a routine transmission service at Kearney Implement. Carl pulled his service records and found universal fluid listed. He contacted a lawyer. In September 2007, Carl Bricker filed a lawsuit against Kearney Implement, alleging negligent service work that caused equipment damage. The lawsuit cited the service records, the operator's manual specifications, and the cost of repairs Carl had paid out of pocket. Kearney Implement settled out of court in November for an undisclosed amount. The settlement included a non-disclosure agreement, but the fact that a lawsuit had been filed and settled was public record. By January 2008, Kearney Implement had lost 18 regular service customers. Some of them switched to a Case IH dealer in Grand Island. Some went to a John Deere dealer in Kearney that was not affiliated with Kearney Implement. Others started doing more of their own service work. The common thread was that none of them trusted Kearney Implement Service Department anymore. Derek Paulson, the service manager, was fired in February 2008. Gregory Stahl issued a statement saying the dealership had updated its service protocols and was committed to using only manufacturer-specified fluids going forward. He did not acknowledge past errors. He did not apologize to affected customers. He just changed the policy and tried to move forward. But the damage was done. In March 2008, Massey Ferguson Corporate sent a regional representative to audit Kearney Implement's service department. The audit found multiple protocol violations, inadequate technician training, and insufficient documentation practices. Massey Ferguson placed the dealership on probationary status and required quarterly compliance reviews. Warren Dill never filed a lawsuit. He never contacted Massey Ferguson Corporate. He never confronted Gregory Stahl. He just kept farming with the 8270 and told the story when people asked. And people asked often because the tractor was visible. Warren used it for primary tillage work, for planning, for pulling grain carts during harvest. It accumulated hours, 4,500, 5,000, 5,800. In 2009, Warren was combining corn when a truck pulled into his field drive. A man got out and waited at the edge of the field. Warren finished his pass and idled over. The man was in his 50s, wearing work clothes, no dealership jacket. "Warren Dill?" the man asked. "That's me." The man said, "My name's Ron Tetrick. I used to be a technician at Kearney Implement." Warren shut down the combine. "Used to be?" Ron said, "I quit in March. Couldn't work there anymore after what happened." Warren waited. Ron said, "I was the one who serviced your Massey Ferguson. M. Hendricks on the service records. That's me. Mike Hendricks is my middle name. I go by Ron." Warren climbed down from the combine. Ron said, "Derek Paulson told me to use universal fluid on everything. Said it saved money and nobody would know the difference. I told him some manufacturers specified different fluids. He said it didn't matter. I was young, I needed the job. I did what he said. Ron looked at the ground. Your tractor failed because of me. I know that. I wanted you to know I didn't do it on purpose. I was following orders. Warren said, You still working on equipment? Ron said, I got a job at the case dealer in Grand Island. They're doing it right, using correct fluids, following manufacturer specs, documenting everything. Warren said, Good. Ron said, I saw your tractor at the co-op last week. It's still running? Warren said, Every day. Ron said, I'm glad you fixed it. I'm sorry it needed fixing. Warren shook his hand. Ron drove away. By 2010, the Massey Ferguson 8270 had 6,400 hours on it. Warren had put 2,200 hours on the tractor in 3 years. He'd replaced the air conditioning compressor in 2008. He'd rebuilt the hydraulic pump in 2009. Normal wear items. The transmission that Kearney Implement had declared unrepairable, had not required any additional service beyond fluid and filter changes. In March 2011, Gregory Stahl closed Kearney Implement's service department. He continued selling equipment but outsourced all service work to independent contractors. By 2012, the dealership had lost its Massey Ferguson franchise. By 2014, it had lost Case IH. In 2015, the dealership closed entirely. The building was sold to an agricultural supply company that now sells seed, chemicals, and bulk fertilizer. Warren Dill still farms 1,100 acres. He's 61 years old now. The Massey Ferguson 8270 is 26 years old and has 9,700 hours on it. Warren replaced the CVT clutch packs in 2015 as preventive maintenance. He rebuilt the variator assembly in 2019. Total transmission-related costs since 2007, $3,200 in parts and materials. The service records he found under the cab floor mat are still in his filing cabinet. He's never shown them to anyone except Ed Kolb and the lawyer Carl Bricker hired for the lawsuit. The lawyer had asked for copies. Warren had provided them. The lawsuit settlement was based in part on documentation that Warren's discovery had validated. In 2021, Warren was at a regional farm show in Grand Island when a man approached him. The man was in his 30s, wearing a Massey Ferguson corporate polo shirt. Are you Warren Dill? The man asked. I am. The man said, I'm Jason Worth, regional service trainer for Massey Ferguson. I've heard about your 8270. Warren said, From who? Jason said, From about 12 different people. That tractor's famous in this territory. Warren said, It's just a tractor. Jason said, It's a tractor that a dealership declared unrepairable and you fixed for $840. And then the service records you found helped shut down a service department that was damaging customer equipment. That's more than just a tractor. That's a case study. Warren said, I didn't shut down anything. I just fixed what was broken. Jason said, and told people what you found. Warren said, when they asked. Jason said, we use your story in service training now. Not with names, but we tell technicians about a farmer who bought a tractor with a failed transmission, found contaminated fluid, traced it back to wrong service procedures, and discovered documentation proving the dealership had caused the failure. We tell them that story to explain why specifications matter, why using the right fluid matters, why documentation matters. Because one farmer in Nebraska proved that cutting corners doesn't save money, it just moves the cost to someone else. Warren said, I just wanted my tractor to run. Jason said, and because you did, a lot of other farmers' tractors run better too. The Massey Ferguson 8270 is still in Warren's equipment lineup. His son Travis, who's 28 and farms with him now, prefers the newer equipment. Travis runs a 2016 John Deere 8370R for primary field work. But when they need a second tractor for planting or a backup during harvest, Travis takes the 8270. He's learned to operate the CVT transmission, he's learned to check the fluid, he's learned to change the filter, and he's learned why his father spent $14,000 on a tractor a dealership said was unrepairable. Because sometimes they're lying, Travis said once, and sometimes they're just wrong, Warren said. And either way, you don't know which it is until you look for yourself. Derek Paulson, the service manager who told Warren the tractor couldn't be fixed, works at an auto parts store in Kearney now. He's 53 years old. When people ask him if he ever worked on farm equipment, he says no. Ron Tetrick, the technician who serviced the 8270 with wrong fluid, is still at the Case IH dealer in Grand Island. He's a senior technician now, one of their best. He trains younger technicians on proper service procedures. He tells them about the Massey Ferguson he serviced incorrectly in 2005 and 2006. He tells them about the farmer who fixed it himself and found the records. He tells them why he'll never use wrong fluid again, even if someone tells him to. Because the farmer always finds out eventually, he says, and when they do, you better hope you did it right. The manila envelope with the service records is still in Warren's filing cabinet. He's never thrown it away. Once a year, usually in winter, when he's organizing paperwork, he pulls it out and reads through the records again. Not because he's angry, not because he wants to relive what happened, but because those records represent something important. They represent proof that when a dealership tells you something can't be fixed, they might be wrong. When they quote you a price that doesn't make sense, there might be a reason. And when you find documentation that contradicts what you've been told, that documentation matters more than anything else. Warren bought a tractor for $14,000 that a dealership said would cost $22,000 to repair. He fixed it for $840. 17 years later, it's still running. And somewhere in a filing cabinet in a farmhouse in Phelps County, Nebraska, there's an envelope with service records that explain exactly why it failed and exactly who was responsible. The dealer who said it was unrepairable never saw those records. But the farmers who stopped trusting that dealer did. And that made all the difference.